Alrighty, we are continuing our study of quadratics, and we're looking into something called factoring. So the start thinking part says Kendra is working through a problem in her math class. She first distributes and then solves the rest of the problem. Her teacher begins talking. Remember, you can't use the distributive property when solving the equation, the teacher says. Kendra looks back at her paper and plans just to start the problem over because she knows that she went over and distributed, but noticed something spilled on her paper and she cannot see the problem before it was distributed. She remembered that she divided by a whole number. What was the original equation? So if after one step she got to the point where it was 3x plus 15 equals 28, and she needs to know what it was before she distributed, then you distribute in by multiplication. So if we want to undo that undistribute, you would divide out. She must be dividing out something, some number that was the same. And what that number turns out to be is the number 3. She ended up distributing in a 3 by multiplication, so she divided out a 3 through division. This is undistributing, and it is a form of factoring. And what a factor is its number or a variable another number can be divided by. So that's what we're looking at. So 3 is a factor of 3x plus 15 because 3 times something gets you the 3x plus 15. So like I said, we're looking at factoring. So this is the first type of factoring we're going to look at, which is undistributing. So figuring out what can both of them be divided by, what's the biggest thing they can both be divided by, and then dividing that out. So when we look at this, we're trying to factor 6x plus 10. So you figure out what can come out of 6x and what can come out of 10. And they can both be divided by 1, but there's got to be something bigger they can be divided by. So the next number would be 2. 2 goes into both 6x and 10. Now 6 goes into 6x, but 6 doesn't come out of 10 because 10 is not evenly divisible by 6. So the largest number that can be divided out is going to be a 2. So if I put a 2 outside, I have to figure out what the other thing would be multiplying 2 by to get your 6x plus 10. So you get your 6x when you divide by 2, you get 3x, and then your 10 divided by 2 gets your 5. And now you have undistributed, which is a form of factoring, and you end up getting 2 times 3x plus 5 equals 6x plus 10. Both the 2 and the 3x plus 5 are factors of 6x plus 10. Now the next one, you're trying to figure out what you can divide out of the 8x and the 12, and we're trying to take the biggest thing. Obviously 1 can come out, but there's something bigger. The number 4 can come out. So we know that you are going to be dividing out of 4, and when you do 8x divided by 4, you get 2x, and when you do 12 divided by 4, you get 3. And you find out that 4 times 2x plus 3 gets your 8x plus 12. So therefore, 4 and 2x plus 3 are factors of 8x plus 12. They are both factors because they can be multiplied together to get the 8x plus 12, and 8x plus 12 is divisible by both of those things. Now this next one, we're looking at this and we're trying to figure out what could be divided out of both of them. A 1 can come out, but no other numbers. So then we look at the variables. And x, they both can be divided by x. So I put an x on the outside, and x squared divided by x is just x, and 3x divided by x is just 3. So we find out that it is x times x plus 3 are the factors of x squared plus 3x. You have now learned how to factor by going over and undistributing. Let's go ahead and continue on. Now we're going to make it a little harder. Rather than just undistributing, we're going to be looking at a different way that we multiplied things together, which was foiling. So we're going to be unfoiling. What we're going to have here is if you have the x plus 5 times x plus 3, when you do your multiplication and you simplify, you end up getting x squared plus 8x plus 15. When you go in that direction, that is foiling. If we already had the x squared, 5x, 3x, and 15, and we went the opposite direction, that would be called factoring. We are breaking it up into its factors, which are 2 binomials. So this first part here is you just going over and foiling, going in one direction. And then on the next one, I gave you the x squared, 4x, 5x, and 12, which comes out to be x squared plus 9x plus 20 when you combine those. And you have to figure out what are the binomials that multiply together to get that. Well, something times something gets you the x squared. So we know that's going to be an x and an x. So that top left and the top left, basically those two parts are going to be multiplied together to get your x squared. Now you have to say x times what gets you 4x? Well, that's going to be a 4. And then x times what gets you your 5x? So that's going to be a 5. And then we just make sure it works out. 4 times 5 does get you 20. So you now know that x squared plus 9x plus 20 equals x plus 4 times x plus 5. You unfoiled, so that's called factoring in this case. You have factored your trinomial into two binomials. So when we look at these ones right here, and we're trying to factor, instead of writing it just as a trinomial of x squared plus 2x minus 15, I've made it into x squared, 5x minus 3x, and minus 15. When you simplify that, you do get the x squared plus 2x minus 15. And we'll talk about just in a second how I get those numbers if you don't have them. But when you have them, you know that top left box is an x squared, so it's got to be an x by x. Top right is 5x, so it's got to be the x times 5. The bottom left is going to be x times something gets me negative 3x, so it's negative 3, and then we just make sure the end works out, which is negative 15. And you have now factored, you have unfoiled, which we're calling factoring, just like undistributing, we're calling factoring, and you get x minus 3 times x plus 5 gets you your x squared plus 2x minus 15. Now the next one, you have your x squared in the top left, so that's got to be an x and an x. And then you have a negative 2x, so that means it's x times negative 2. The bottom left is negative 7x. You already had the x there, so it's got to be a negative 7. And then negative 2 times negative 7 does get you your 12. And you have gotten your factors. That means that x squared minus 9x plus 14 breaks down to be x minus 7 and x minus 2. So you have unfoiled, which is called factoring. And then this last one is a little bit more confusing because you have to figure out what multiplies to get your 2x squared. Well, it's a 2x and an x, but I don't know which goes where. And as you can see, I put the 2x up top at first, but that didn't make sense because if we had a 2x, it'd be 2x times something gets me 1x in that bottom left, and that just didn't make any sense. So I went over and put the 2x where you see it now. That way, 2x times x gets you 2x squared, and then 2x times 3 gets you your 6x. The x times 1 gets you 1x, and 3 times 1 gets you 3. So those four terms come together to be 2x squared plus 7x plus 3, and when they are factored, you get 2x plus 1 and x plus 3. Now this hard one here, the problem is you have 12x squared, and there's many different ways you can get 12x squared. You could do a 2 and a 6, a 3 and a 4, a 4 and a 3, a 12 and a 1, I forget what I've already said. There's many different ways, so you had to work at it a little bit. And I ended up getting a 6x and a 2, and I figured out where those went. And then it's kind of like a little Sudoku puzzle. You keep moving things around and trying different numbers, and I was finally able to get to the point where it worked out with 2x minus 5 and 6x plus 3. And the only thing with 6x plus 3 is that a 3 could still come out of that because both those are divisible by 3. So I left the 2x minus 5 as one of the factors. I was able to factor out a 3, and then you were left with the 2x plus 1. Therefore, it is 3 times 2x minus 5 and 2x plus 1. Those are the factors of 12x squared minus 24x minus 15 when you simplify that. Now on the bottom, the question is, how did I get those two numbers? Where do those numbers come from? How did I get a trinomial becoming a four-term polynomial? This is how you do it. So you have to make a little thing called an ACB chart. You know the A is the number attached to the x squared, B is the number attached to the x, and C is by itself. We learned that when it was in standard form. So when I say an ACB chart, that is just your A value times your C. And in problem number 1, A times C gets you 8. So I put an 8 there. And your B value is just a 6. Now what you're trying to do to find out what those two numbers are that go in the boxes, you're finding two numbers that multiply to get 8 and add to get 6. There's many numbers that multiply to get 8. 1 and 8, 8 and 1, -1, -8, 2 and 4, -4, -2. There's many different ones that multiply to get 8, but there's only one pair that also adds to get you 6. And they are going to be 4 and 2. So that's how I knew that those boxes were going to be filled in with a 4x and with a 2x. And once you add that, you can figure out how do you get your x squared? It's an x and an x. How do you get your 2x? It's an x and a 2. How do you get your 4x? It's a 4 and an x. And how do you get your 8? It's the 2 times 4. Now we do the next problem. In the next problem, once again, you have to do your A times C. A times C gets you -10. B is 3. And you have to figure out two numbers that multiply to get you -10 and add to get you 3. This is a little trickier because one's going to be positive and one's going to be negative. So when you keep tinkering, you're like, oh, is it -5 and 2? No, that's going to add to be a -3. You're going to have to try many different things out. And finally, you end up getting a 5 and -2. And therefore, those boxes are going to be filled in with a 5x and a -2x. And once you have that, so the first one is the x squared, the bottom right is still just that -10. And instead of having a 3x, I'm putting 5x and -2x. And I said, what multiplies to get x squared? It's x and x. How do you get a -2x? It's a -2 and x. How do you get the 5x? It's a 5 and x. And then on this last one, once again, you are going to do the ACB chart. 2 times 12 gets you 24. Your B is 11. You have to figure out two numbers that multiply to get you 24 and add to get you 11, and they are 8 and 3. So what you're going to want to do is fill in those boxes with an 8x and a 3x, and then the top left is just the first term, which is the 2x squared, and the bottom right is the 12. And then you say, what multiplies to get you 2x squared? It's a 2x and an x, and you got to figure out which order it should go in, which goes where. And then you find out that you're going to say, how do I get my 3x? It's x times 3. How do I get my 8x? It's 2x times 4. And how do I get my 12? It's 3 times 4. So you now know that 2x squared plus 11x plus 12 is going to get you 2x plus 3 and x plus 4. And those are going to be the factors you undistributed. So let's go ahead up to here. All right, in the homework, it says explain what it means for something, let's call it A, to be a factor of something else. Let's call it B. What that means is that B can be divided by A. Or a different way you could think of this is A times something is going to give you the B. So 2 is a factor of 6 because 2 times 3 gets you 6, or 6 divided by 2 gets you 3. Now on to number 2. Number 2 is just working with trying to figure out what are two numbers that multiply to get you something and add to get you something else. So it says two numbers that multiply to get you 17 and add to get you 18. Well, since 17 is prime, you know it's either going to be 17 and 1 or negative 17 and negative 1. Those are the only possibilities. 17 and 1 gets you positive 18, negative 17 and negative 1 gets you negative 18. So we know the winning pair is going to be 17 and 1. Next, multiply to get you 20, add to get you 9. Well, this is a little bit more confusing because it could be 4 and 5, it could be 10 and 2. There's different variations, but they also need to be able to add to get you 9, and the only numbers that add to get 9 and multiply to get 20 is 4 and 5. The next one are going to be multiplying to get 11 and adding to get negative 12. So it's either going to be 11 and 1 or negative 11 and negative 1. And since they need to get you a negative 12, it has to be negative 11 and negative 1. The next one is a little bit more confusing because you have to multiply to get 36. So it seems like a positive times a positive. But since they are going to be adding to be negative 20, you know that it has to be a negative and a negative. So when we do this, you start going through, is it 6 and 6? Is it 12 and 3? It ends up being negative 18 and negative 2. They multiply to get 36, and they're going to add to get you negative 20. So you got to look at little rules like this. Like sometimes it's going to be a positive and a negative, and the positive needs to be bigger because when they add, they still become positive. Or in this case, it's either a positive and a positive or a negative and a negative. And since they are adding to be negative, it's going to have to be a negative and a negative. Now in this one right here, you guys are supposed to figure out what the other binomial is that is going to multiply by the first one to get the trinomial that is desired. So I already knew that it was when you FOIL, at some point it's going to be 2 times something gets you that last number. So I knew it was going to be 7. So I tried out x plus 7. And when I did my little box method here, I did get x squared plus 9x plus 14. And the next one, it was going to be negative 4 times something gets me my negative 12. So I figured it was probably going to be a 3. So I tried the x plus 3. And when I multiply those things together, I indeed got the x squared minus 1x minus 12. Now on number 4, you guys are supposed to actually be factoring this. I've broken it up so that it is 4 terms, not 3. You don't have to find your little winning pair there. And in the first one, it's an x and x become your x squared, x and 6 get your 6x, x and a 3 get your 3x, and then you get your 18. And on the second one, you know the only numbers that can be multiplied or things that can be multiplied to get the 3x squared is going to be a 3x and an x, but you didn't know which one went where. But since if I put the 3x in the other location, 3x times something can't give you 2x. So that's how I knew the 3x needed to go where it's at. And you could see the two binomials I came up with. Now on number 5 here, I did not get you the 4 terms. So you had to do your ACB chart. So you had to find out two numbers that multiply to get 12 and add to get 7. And it was 3 and 4, which is why I filled in those boxes with the 3x and the 4x. And when you had that, it was pretty easy to get to the x plus 3 and the x plus 4. And the next one, you were supposed to get two numbers that multiply to get negative 14 and add to get you a positive 5. So one's going to be negative, one's going to be positive, and the positive has to be bigger. That's how I got my 7 and my negative 2. So I got a 7x and a negative 2x in those corner ones. And then I found out that it was x plus 7 and x minus 2. All right, and this last one, instead of unfoiling, you are undistributing. So you're trying to figure out what is the largest thing that could be divided out of 6x and 21. And while 1 can be divided out of both those, there's a bigger number, which is 3. So 6x divided by 3 gets you 2x, 21 divided by 3 gets you 7. So you end up getting the factors of 6x plus 21 is going to be 3 times 2x plus 7. And that is going to be the factored form. All right, hopefully that made sense. Thanks for watching.